Hey guys, welcome to Number the Stars chapter 17. Today we're going to finish the book. I'm also going to read the afterword, which is just a few short pages after the book ends, kind of just giving an update that the author gives about the book. So the chapter 17 is pretty short today and the afterword is pretty short. So this video won't be very long. You guys have been working super hard with your notebooks and your journals, taking notes and making observations and things like that along the way. So what I encourage you to do is at the end of the video today, go back through your journal, your notebook, look through, see what you've written down, go over what new words you learned, anything that you predicted. Just like take a flip back through and see all that work that you've been doing the past couple weeks as we've been reading Number the Stars. So today, there aren't going to be any sort of stop and jots. We're just going to take some time to listen and to enjoy the last chapter of the book. Feel free to post any final thoughts in Flipgrid or write down any final thoughts that you have about the book in your journal. But for the most part today, I just want you to relax and enjoy the book and the fact that you are done with 4th grade. So how exciting. But let's go ahead and read chapter 17 because I know you guys are dying to know how the book ends. Chapter 17 is called All This Long Time. Let me recap. Sorry, before we read, it took me a minute there. At the end of chapter 16, Anne-Marie is wondering if she will ever see her friend Ellen again. So we're going to read chapter 17 and kind of figure that out. The war would end. Uncle Henrik had said that, and it was true. The war ended almost 2 long years later. Anne-Marie was 12. Church bells rang all over Copenhagen early that May evening. The Danish flag was raised everywhere. People stood in the streets and wept as they sang the national anthem of Denmark. Anne-Marie stood on the balcony of the apartment with her parents and her sister and watched. Up and down the street and across the other side, she could see the flags and banners in almost every window. She knew that many of those apartments were empty. For nearly 2 years now, neighbors had tended the plants and dusted the furniture and polished the candlesticks for the Jew who had fled. Her mother had done so for the Rosens. Now I'm wondering if, now that the war has ended, are things going to change? Can it go back to normal the way it used to be? Because now none of the Jews are there. So I wonder if they'll come back or if life as they knew it could be no longer. That's what friends do, Mama said. Now neighbors had entered each unoccupied waiting apartment, opened a window, and hung a symbol of freedom in there. This evening, Mrs. Johansson's face was wet with tears. Kirsty, waving a small flag, sang. Her blue eyes were bright. Even Kirsty was growing up. No longer was she a light-hearted chatterbox of a child. Now she was taller, more serious, and very thin. She looked like the pictures of Lise at 7 in the old album. Peter Nielsen was dead. Whoa. It was a painful fact to recall on this day when there was so much joy in Denmark. But Anne-Marie forced herself to think of her red-headed almost brother and how devastating the day was when they received the news that Peter had been captured and executed by the Germans in a public square in Copenhagen. So Peter was caught for helping free the Jews and he was killed by the Germans. So he was executed for standing up for other people. I just can't think of a more brave person. So we know that both Lise and Peter were fighting for other people's freedom. They were fighters, and he ended up being killed for it. But who knows how many Jews he saved in the process. He had written a letter to them from prison the night before he was shot. It had said simply that he had loved them and he was not afraid, and that he was proud to have done what he could for his country and for the sake of all free people. He had asked in the letter to be buried beside Lise. But even that was not to be for Peter. The Nazis refused to return the bodies of the young men they shot. They simply buried them there where they were killed and marked the graves only with numbers. They marked the grave with numbers. I know it's backwards because of my camera, but remember the name of the book is Number the Stars. Number the Stars. So they marked their graves with numbers. There's a connection there. Later, Anne Marie had gone to the place with her parents, and they laid flowers there on the black numbered ground. That night, Anne Marie's parents told her the truth about Lisa's death at the beginning of the war. She was part of the resistance too, Papa said. Part of the group that fought for our country in whatever way they could. We didn't know, Mama added. She didn't tell us. Peter told us after he died. Oh, Papa, Anne Marie cried. Mama, they didn't shoot Lise too, did they? The way they did Peter in the public square with people watching? She wanted to know. She wanted to know it all, but wasn't certain that she could bear the knowledge. Papa shook his head. She was with Peter and others in the cellar where they held secret meetings to make plans. Somehow the Nazis found out and they raided that place. They all ran different ways trying to escape. Some of them were shot, Mama told her sadly. Peter was shot in the arm. Do you remember that Peter's arm was bandaged in a sling at Lisa's funeral? He wore a coat so that no one would notice and a hat to hide his red hair. The Nazis were looking for him. Anne Marie didn't remember and she hadn't noticed. The whole day had been a blur of grief. But what about Lise? She asked. If she wasn't shot, what happened? So now Anne Marie's finding out that Lise didn't actually die like her parents had said. She died from being part of the resistance, just like her fiance Peter. From the military car, they saw her running and simply ran her down. So it was true, what you said? She was hit by a car? It was true, Papa told her. They were all so young, Mama said, shaking her head. She blinked, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a long, deep breath. So very, very young, with so much hope. Now, remembering Lise, Anne Marie looked from the balcony into the street. She saw that below, amid the music, singing the sound of the church bells, people were dancing. It brought back another memory, the memory of Lise long ago wearing the yellow dress, dancing with Peter on the night at the night they announced their engagement. She turned and went to her bedroom where the blue trunk still stood in the corner, as it had all those years. Opening it, Anne Marie saw that the yellow dress had begun to fade. It was discolored at the edges where it had lain so long in folds. Carefully, she spread open the skirt of the dress and found the place where Ellen's necklace lay hidden in its pocket. The little Star of David gleamed gold. Papa, she said, returning to the balcony, where her father was standing with the others, watching the rejoicing crowd. She opened her hand and showed him the necklace. Can you fix this? I've kept it all this long time. It was Ellen's. Her father took it from her hand and examined the broken clasp. Yes, he said, I can fix it. When the Rosens come home, you give it back to Ellen. Until then, Anne Marie told him, I will wear it myself. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 17. A pretty powerful story of friendship and trust and really helping other people. We see a lot of brave characters in this story. Peter, physically brave by rescuing people. Mama is brave, but also we see Anne Marie's bravery almost inside of her for her friend and her friend's family. So I'm going to also, this video is pretty short, so I'm going to read the afterword. It's a few pages. The afterword is just something that the author has written after the story to kind of answer some of the questions that you may have. So here we go. How much of Anne Marie's story is true? I know I will be asked that. Let me tell you here where fact ends and fiction begins. So the author is explaining what parts of this story is true and what's not. So remember, this book is historical fiction, which means the Holocaust, where they were killing and capturing Jews, was a real event. The Nazis were real. Everything was real, but the characters might not necessarily be real. So the author is using a real historical timeline in fake characters. So she's explaining what's real and what's not. Anne Marie Johansson is a child of my imagination, so she made her up. Though she grew there from the stories told to me by my friend Annalise Platt, to whom this book is dedicated and who was herself a child in Copenhagen during the long years of the German occupation. I had always been fascinated and moved by Annalise's descriptions, not only of the personal deprivation that her family and her neighbors suffered during those years and the sacrifices they made, but even more by the greater picture she drew for me of the courage and integrity of the Danish people under the leadership of the king they loved so much, Christian X. So I created little Anne Marie and her family, set them in a Copenhagen apartment on a street where I had walked myself, and imagined their life there against the real events in 1943. So the author is coming up with this family, these characters, but putting them in a real life scenario. So she actually walked the physical street, saw an apartment, and then was able to take what she knew and her imagination and twist together a story. Denmark surrendered to Germany in 1940, and it is true. And it was true for the reasons that Papa explained to Anne Marie. The country was small and undefeated, with no army of any size. The people would have been destroyed, and they tried to defend themselves against the huge German forces. So surely, with great sorrow, King Christian surrendered, and overnight the soldiers moved in. From then on, for 5 years, they occupied the country. Visible on almost every street corner, always armed and spit shined, they controlled the newspapers, the rail system, the government, the schools, the hospitals, and the day-to-day existence of the Danish people. But they never controlled King Christian. It is true that King Christian rode alongside his horse from the palace every morning, unguarded, to greet people. And although this seems charming as to be a flight of the author's fancy, the story that Papa told Anne Marie of the soldier who asked the Danish teenager, "Who is that man?" This story is recorded in one of the documents that still remain from that time. It is true, too, that on August 1943, the Danes sank their own entire navy in Copenhagen harbor as the Germans approached to take over ships for their own use. My friend Annalise remembers it, and many who were children at the time would have been awakened, as little Kirsty was, by the explosions and the fiercely lighted sky as the ships burned. So her real friend's name is Annalise, and so I'm wondering if she took the name Annalise and kind of separated it and made Anne Marie and made Lise as a separate character. That's what I'm thinking. On the new year of the Jewish high holidays in 1943, those who gathered to worship at the synagogue in Copenhagen, as the fictional Rosens did, were warned by the rabbi that they were to be taken and relocated by the Germans. The rabbis knew because of a high German official told the Danish government, which passed the information along to the leaders of the Jewish community. The name of that German was G.F. Duckschwitz, and I hope that even today, so many years later, there are flowers on his grave because he was a man of compassion and courage. And so the Jews, but all but few who didn't believe the warning, fled the first raids. They fled into the arms of the Danes, who took them in, fed them, clothed them, hid them, and helped them to safety in Sweden. In the following weeks, the Jewish New Year, almost the entire Jewish population of Denmark, nearly 7,000 people, were smuggled across the sea to Sweden. The little hand-hemmed linen handkerchief that Anne Marie carried to her uncle, surely something made up by an author who wanted to create a heroine out of fictional little girl? No, the handkerchief as well was a part of history. After the Nazis began to use police dogs to sniff out hidden passengers on the fishing boats, Swedish scientists worked swiftly to prevent such detection. They created a powerful powder composed of dried rabbit's blood. The blood attracted the dogs, and when they sniffed it, they were destroyed temporarily by their sense of smell. Almost every boat captain used such a permeated handkerchief, and many lives were saved by that device. The secret operations that saved the Jews were orchestrated by the Danish resistance, which, like all resistance movements, had composed mainly of very young and very brave people. Peter Nielsen, although he is fictional, represents the courageous and idealistic young people, so many of whom died at the hands of the enemy. In the reading of the resistance leaders in Denmark, I came across the account of a young man named Kim Malthe-Brun, who was eventually captured and executed by the Nazis when he was only 21. I read his story, and I have read so many others, turning pages, skimming here and there, of the sabotage, tactic, and capture of the escape. After a while, the courage becomes routine to the reader. Then, quite unprepared, I turned the page and faced a photograph of Kim Malthe-Brun. He wore a turtleneck sweater, and his thick, light hair was windblown. His eyes looked out at me, unwavering on the page. Seeing him there, so terribly young, broke my heart. But seeing the quiet determination in his boyish eyes made me determined, too, to tell his story, and that of all the Danish people who shared his dreams. So I would like to end this with a paragraph written by that young man in a letter to his mother the night before he was put to death. So this is a letter of this guy who the author made Peter based on this real life guy. And this is what he wrote to his mom the night before he knew he was going to die. It's just a really short thing, and then the book will be done. And I want you to remember that you must not dream yourselves back to the times before the war, but to the dream for you all, young and old, must be to create an ideal of human decency and not a narrow-minded and prejudiced one. That is the great gift of our country hungers for, something every little peasant boy can look forward to, and with pleasure feel he's a part of something he can work and fight for. Surely that gift, the gift of world of human decency, is the one that all countries hunger for still. I hope that this story of Denmark and its people will remind us that a such world is possible. A world where people fight for others is what she's saying. And guys, that's the end of the afterword in the book. We really hope that you enjoyed the book. If you're interested in reading it for yourself, once again, Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. You can check it out at a library or something like that, or maybe check it out when you come back to Bovers next year. Anyway, thank you guys for following along with us during this book. We love you, and have a great summer break, and we will see you next year in 5th grade. Bye, guys.